The night settles gently over the land beside the Nile. The day's heat slowly slips away, leaving behind warm stones that still hold the memory of the sun. A quiet breeze moves across the river, carrying the scent of wet reeds, soft mud, and distant cooking fires that have almost burned down to glowing embers. Somewhere in the darkness, water brushes against the shore with a slow and steady rhythm. It is the same sound that countless generations have heard before drifting into sleep. The stars appear one by one above the wide Egyptian sky. They shine without hurry, reflected in the calm surface of the river below. Small villages rest along the banks, their mud brick homes wrapped in silence. Doors are closed. Oil lamps burn low behind woven reed curtains. Families lie close together on simple sleeping mats, grateful for the cooler air that comes after sunset. Tonight, we leave behind the names of great kings and towering monuments. Instead, we quietly step into the ordinary lives that filled this ancient land thousands of years ago. These are the people whose names were rarely carved into stone. They left behind no grand temples and commanded no armies. Yet every sunrise found them awake, working, hoping, and caring for their families beneath the same sky that still stretches over Egypt today. Among them were the fishermen. Long before the first hint of dawn, while much of the village still slept beneath the fading stars, one fisherman slowly opened his eyes. There was no loud alarm. No bell announced the beginning of the day. Instead, years of habit gently woke him before the birds began to sing. He listened quietly for a moment. Outside, the river whispered against its banks. Somewhere nearby, another family stirred softly inside their home. The village remained mostly silent. He sat up slowly, careful not to wake the small children sleeping beside him. Their breathing was deep and peaceful after yesterday's long hours beneath the hot Egyptian sun. His wife remained asleep beneath a light linen covering, her face relaxed in the cool darkness before morning. The fisherman stretched his tired arms. Every muscle carried memories of countless days pulling heavy nets from the Nile. His hands were rough and thick with old scars. Tiny cuts crossed his fingers from fish scales, woven rope, and years of hard work. His back often ached before the day had even begun. Still, another morning waited. He quietly reached for his folded linen kilt, carefully wrapped beside the doorway. The cloth was simple. It had been washed many times in the river until it became soft with age. He tied it around his waist with practiced movements that required almost no thought. Near the doorway rested a small bundle of fishing tools. Nothing about them looked impressive. A few carefully repaired nets. Several wooden floats. Smooth stones tied with plant fiber to weigh the nets beneath the surface. A short knife whose handle had become polished from years of use. Everything showed signs of repair. Nothing was wasted. New tools were difficult to replace. Before leaving, he quietly ate a small piece of yesterday's bread. It had become dry during the night, but hunger was familiar. Beside the bread waited a handful of onions. Their strong smell filled the tiny room as he peeled away the outer skin. This simple meal would carry him through the first hours of work. He stepped outside. The village still belonged to the darkness. Above him, thousands of stars shimmered across the endless sky. The moon rested low over the western desert, casting pale light across the quiet river. Palm trees stood almost motionless. Their long leaves whispered whenever the breeze gently passed through them. As he walked toward the Nile, his sandals softly pressed against the packed earth road. Other shadows slowly appeared. Another fisherman nodded quietly as they crossed paths. No greeting needed many words. Both men already knew what the day would bring. They reached the riverbank where several small boats rested half upon the muddy shore. These boats were built from local wood whenever possible. Some contained bundles of bundled reeds for added support. They were narrow, practical, and light enough for several men to push into the shallow water together. Their surfaces carried marks from years of scraping against hidden rocks and muddy banks. The fishermen worked without hurry. One checked the ropes. Another folded the net more carefully. Someone adjusted the wooden oars. Everything happened with calm routine. Soon the small boat drifted away from shore. The village slowly disappeared behind them, becoming only a cluster of dark shapes beneath the stars. The Nile surrounded them with quiet. Even today it is difficult to imagine just how completely this river shaped every hour of Egyptian life. The Nile was more than water. It was the road connecting villages. It was food. It was work. It was hope during dry seasons. It carried traders, travelers, priests, messages, and fishermen alike. For these men, the river was almost another member of the family. They knew its moods. They recognized gentle currents hidden beneath smooth water. They remembered where fish gathered after flooding. They noticed changing winds before storms arrived. Much of this knowledge had never been written down. It passed quietly from fathers to sons, from older fishermen to younger apprentices who listened carefully while rowing through the morning darkness. The eastern horizon slowly softened. Deep black became dark blue. Dark blue slowly welcomed pale gray. The first birds began calling from thick reeds along the shoreline. Herons stood perfectly still, waiting for their own breakfast. Small insects schemed across the water's surface. The fishermen reached one of their familiar fishing places. No sign marked the location. Only memory guided them. The oldest fisherman quietly nodded. The nets were lifted. Each movement had been repeated thousands of times throughout their lives. The heavy woven net slowly spread through the cool morning air before gently falling across the quiet water. Small ripples widened in perfect circles. Then silence returned. The men waited. Waiting formed a large part of fishing. There was no rushing the river. During these peaceful moments, conversation remained soft. Sometimes they spoke about repairing a neighbor's roof after harvest. Sometimes they wondered whether the coming flood would be generous. Sometimes they mentioned a child learning to walk. Many mornings passed almost entirely in comfortable silence. The Nile itself seemed to speak enough. As daylight slowly grew stronger, mist drifted above the water. The river appeared almost dreamlike. Palm trees became reflections. Birds crossed the glowing sky. Far away, another fishing boat floated quietly between patches of reeds. Soon it was time. Together they began pulling. The ropes tightened. The net resisted. Their shoulders leaned backward. Feet pressed firmly against the wooden floor of the boat. Water splashed gently over the sides. Little by little the heavy net rose from beneath the surface. Silver fish flashed in the morning sunlight. Some struggled wildly. Others became tangled among the woven fibers. The fishermen worked carefully to remove each catch without damaging the valuable net. Every fish mattered. Some would feed their own families. Others would be sold in village markets. Some would be dried beneath the hot sun to preserve them for future meals. Fish formed one of the most dependable foods throughout much of ancient Egypt. Fresh fish tasted best, but drying allowed families to survive difficult seasons when catches became smaller. Nothing useful was wasted. As the morning continued, the sun climbed steadily higher. Its warmth slowly spread across the river. Cool air disappeared. By mid-morning, sweat covered the fishermen's skin. Their linen clothing clung lightly against their backs. The work became slower. Their arms grew heavier. Still they continued. They checked more nets. They rowed toward another familiar stretch of water. Sometimes the catch was generous. Sometimes it was disappointingly small. The river gave according to its own quiet rhythms. No fisherman expected every day to be equal. Patience was simply another tool. Along the shoreline, village life slowly awakened. Women carried clay jars toward the river to collect water. Children chased one another through dusty paths before morning chores began. Donkeys patiently waited beside baskets ready for market goods. Smoke rose gently from cooking fires. The smell of fresh bread drifted across the warm air. Back inside one small home, the fisherman's wife had already begun her own day's work. She carefully swept the packed earth floor using a bundle of reeds. Fine dust gathered near the doorway before being carried outside. She prepared grain upon a grinding stone, moving the upper stone back and forth with steady rhythm. It was tiring work. Hour after hour, women throughout Egypt transformed grain into flour through simple strength and endless patience. The sound of grinding stones echoed through villages every morning. It became part of daily life, as familiar as birdsong beside the Nile. Nearby, one child rubbed sleepy eyes while another carefully helped gather small pieces of firewood. The family worked together because nearly every task required many hands. Children learned responsibilities naturally. No formal lesson announced the beginning of adulthood. Instead, each season quietly taught another useful skill. The fisherman would return later carrying both fish and stories carried gently by the river. But for now, the boat continued drifting beneath the growing heat. The sunlight reflected brightly from the water, making the fishermen narrow their eyes. They wrapped simple cloth around their heads whenever possible to soften the burning rays. Shade became precious. Occasionally they guided the boat beneath taller reeds where brief moments of cooler air offered small comfort. There they drank water stored inside clay jars. The water remained surprisingly cool because of the porous clay that slowly allowed tiny amounts of moisture to evaporate. Simple wisdom often solved difficult problems. Hours passed with peaceful repetition. Cast the net. Wait. Pull together. Sort the fish. Repair small tiers. Row onward. Cast again. This rhythm continued through generations. Perhaps that is why the fishermen moved with such quiet confidence. Their bodies remembered every motion. The work no longer demanded constant thought. Instead, their minds wandered gently across familiar concerns. One man thought about replacing part of his roof before the next flood season. Another hoped his oldest daughter would soon marry into a kind family. Someone silently counted how many fish might be traded for fresh vegetables. Another simply watched the clouds drifting slowly across the Egyptian sky. The world moved at the pace of the river. No one hurried the current. No one hurried the sunrise. Even hard work unfolded with patient rhythm. As the afternoon approached, heat shimmered above the water. Birdsong became quieter. Many animals rested beneath whatever shade they could find. The fishermen themselves slowed their movements, careful not to waste precious strength. Their skin glowed with sweat. Their shoulders ached. Their hands felt heavy. Yet there remained one final place to check before returning home. The oldest fisherman pointed quietly toward a patch of tall reeds where gentle currents often gathered schools of fish. The younger men nodded. The boat changed direction almost silently. The reeds swayed softly in the afternoon breeze. Dragonflies floated above the water like tiny pieces of colored glass catching sunlight. A turtle slowly disappeared beneath the river's surface. Everything seemed wrapped in peaceful stillness. The net slipped into the water once again. And with calm patience, the fisherman waited for the Nile to answer. The silence beside the reeds remained unbroken for several quiet moments. The fisherman hardly moved. One rested his hand upon the worn edge of the boat. Another watched the gentle circles spreading across the water where the net had disappeared beneath the surface. A small bird landed on a nearby stalk of papyrus, balanced there for only a breath, and then lifted itself into the warm afternoon air. Nothing in the Nile seemed to hurry. The river flowed as it always had, carrying tiny bits of rich soil from lands far to the south. It curved through the valley with quiet confidence, feeding fields, filling canals, and giving life to villages scattered along its banks. For the fishermen, this slow-moving water was more familiar than any road. They knew the smell of the river after sunrise. They knew the color of the water before the flood season arrived. They even knew the sound that different winds made as they traveled across its wide surface. One of the younger men quietly touched the rope. It felt heavier. He glanced toward the oldest fisherman. The older man gave only a small nod. Together they began to pull. The rope slid through their rough hands, wet and cool from the river. Their shoulders leaned backward with steady strength. Little drops of water fell from the rising net, catching the afternoon light before disappearing again into the Nile. Soon the first silver scales appeared beneath the surface. More followed. The net had found another generous gathering of fish. No one shouted with excitement. There was only the quiet satisfaction that came after long hours of patient work. Each man understood that tomorrow might be different. Today the river had been kind. Another day it might offer much less. They carefully lifted the catch into the boat. Several fish continued to flap gently across the wooden floor before settling into stillness. The fishermen worked slowly, removing each one from the woven fibers while checking every knot for damage. A torn net could become a serious problem. Repairing one required many careful hours, and until it was fixed, fewer fish could be caught. Every strand of plant fiber mattered. The oldest fisherman noticed a small break near one corner. He reached into a simple leather pouch hanging from his belt. Inside rested coils of thin cord made from twisted flax fibers. Sitting quietly near the bow of the boat, he began repairing the damage with movements so practiced that his hands seemed almost to remember the pattern by themselves. His fingers moved steadily. Loop. Pull. Tighten. Loop again. Years ago, his own father had shown him exactly how to make these repairs. There had been no written instructions. No drawings upon papyrus. The lesson had taken place in another small boat beneath another Egyptian sunrise, much like this one. Knowledge traveled from one pair of hands to another. As the repair continued, the younger fisherman rested for a little while. One uncorked a clay water jar and passed it carefully around the boat. The water tasted slightly earthy from the clay vessel, cool despite the growing heat. Each man drank slowly, never wasting a single drop. Another reached into a woven basket and removed a few small loaves of coarse bread. The bread had become firm after several hours beneath the sun, but no one seemed bothered by it. An onion was cut into thick pieces. A handful of dried fish from an earlier catch completed the simple meal. The men ate quietly. The bread required slow chewing. The onions filled the air with their sharp smell. The dried fish carried the taste of salt and sunshine from the days it had spent drying upon woven mats outside the village. There were no elaborate meals waiting during a fishing day. Simple food gave simple strength. After eating, one fisherman closed his eyes for only a moment. The gentle rocking of the boat beneath him almost invited sleep. The water tapped softly against the wooden sides. Far away, another boat drifted across the shimmering river, so distant that it seemed almost like a small leaf floating upon the current. The afternoon sun climbed higher. Its light became bright enough to soften every distant shape into a gentle haze. Along the riverbanks, farmers continued tending narrow strips of fertile land. Bent over young plants, they worked carefully beneath the relentless heat. Water lifted from canals using simple tools slowly flowed into waiting fields. The Nile fed everyone. The fishermen gathered food from its waters. The farmers gathered food from its soil. The potters shaped clay taken from its banks. The reed cutters harvested papyrus growing along its edges. Even children found small tasks connected to the river. Life spread outward from the Nile like branches from the trunk of a great tree. The fishermen finally turned their boat toward home. The return journey always felt quieter. The work of catching fish had ended. Now the steady pull of the current helped carry them downstream. The oars dipped gently into the water whenever needed. Birds circled overhead. Several white egrets stood perfectly still in the shallows, waiting with remarkable patience for fish small enough to catch with their sharp beaks. The fishermen smiled quietly. Even the birds understood patience. As the village slowly came into view, small figures appeared along the shoreline. Children were often the first to notice returning boats. Their sharp young eyes searched the river almost constantly. One little boy shaded his face with his hand before calling toward the houses behind him. More children came running. Bare feet kicked small clouds of dust into the warm afternoon air. Their voices carried softly across the water. Not every child belonged to the returning fishermen. Many simply enjoyed watching the boats arrive. They wondered whether today's catch had been large. Sometimes a father returning from the river brought home an especially beautiful fish for the evening meal. Sometimes he carried only enough for selling at the market. Either way, the children greeted each boat with eager smiles. The fishermen guided their vessel gently onto the muddy bank. Several boys hurried forward to help pull the boat onto shore. The older men thanked them with quiet nods. The baskets of fish were lifted carefully from the boat. They felt heavier now than they had while floating upon the water. Each basket represented many hours beneath the Egyptian sun. The fishermen carried them toward the center of the village. Already the familiar smells of evening surrounded them. Fresh bread baked inside dome-shaped ovens. Lentils simmered in clay pots. Smoke drifted lazily upward from cooking fires. Goats wandered home through narrow paths. Donkeys stood patiently beside loaded baskets. Women finished washing clothing beside the river before carrying it home in neat bundles balanced upon their heads. The village moved through its evening routine with calm purpose. The fishermen's families gathered around them. A young daughter reached for her father's hand. A small son proudly tried lifting one of the lighter baskets before laughing at its surprising weight. The fisherman's wife smiled warmly as she counted the day's catch with experienced eyes. She did not need to ask whether it had been a good day. She could see the answer herself. Some of the fish would remain with the family. Others would be exchanged for grain, vegetables, oil, or cloth. Very little coin passed through the hands of ordinary villagers during much of ancient Egyptian history. Instead, people traded goods according to need. Fish for grain. Bread for pottery. Flax cloth for baskets. Work itself became another form of payment. Neighbors helped neighbors because one day they themselves might need help. Near the edge of the village stood a shaded area where several fishermen cleaned the day's catch. Flat stones served as simple work surfaces. Sharp bronze knives glimmered softly in the fading sunlight. Fish scales reflected tiny flashes of light before drifting onto the ground. Cats soon appeared. Egyptian villages always seemed to have cats nearby. Patient and graceful, they quietly waited around fish cleaning areas, hoping for small scraps. No one chased them away. They helped keep unwanted animals away from stored food, and over many generations they became welcome companions in homes and workshops alike. One gray cat sat a respectful distance away, watching every movement with calm yellow eyes. Now and then, a fisherman tossed a tiny piece of fish toward it. The cat accepted each gift with quiet dignity before settling once again into stillness. Nearby, older women prepared several fish for drying. The cleaned fish were rubbed with salt when it was available and carefully arranged upon woven reed racks where warm air could slowly preserve them. The process required attention. Too much moisture would spoil the food. Too much direct heat could damage the flesh. Experience taught exactly where each rack should stand. Evening shadows slowly stretched across the village. The fierce brightness of afternoon softened into warm golden light. Palm trees cast long narrow shadows over dusty paths. The air became easier to breathe. Children finished their last chores before gathering together to play simple games. Their laughter drifted gently through the village, never disturbing its peaceful rhythm. The fishermen themselves were finally able to rest. One sat beneath a sycamore tree whose broad branches offered welcome shade. He removed his sandals and rubbed his tired feet. Fine dust covered his ankles. Small cuts marked his hands. His shoulders ached from pulling heavy nets all day. Yet there was also quiet satisfaction. His family would eat. Tomorrow's bread was a little more certain. The oldest fisherman remained busy a while longer. The repaired net needed one final inspection before darkness fully arrived. He spread it carefully across the ground. The woven fibers formed a beautiful pattern of patient craftsmanship. Every knot represented someone's careful hands. Every repair carried the memory of another fishing trip. Looking at the net, one could almost imagine all the mornings it had greeted before sunrise. How many rivers had it touched? How many seasons had passed beneath its woven strands? How many fathers and sons had worked together holding these same ropes? The answers had disappeared into time. Only the quiet work remained. As the sun finally slipped below the western horizon, the colors of the sky changed almost without notice. Golden light became soft amber. Amber faded into gentle purple. The first evening stars quietly returned. Oil lamps appeared inside mud brick homes one by one. Their small flames flickered behind open doorways, casting warm circles of light onto packed earth floors. Families gathered close together. Simple meals were shared without hurry. Bread was broken by hand. Fresh fish roasted over small fires. Bowls of beans, onions, and herbs passed from one family member to another. Conversations remained gentle after such a long day of labor. Many people simply listened. The sounds of chewing, quiet voices, and crackling firewood blended into the peaceful music of village life. Outside, the Nile continued flowing through the gathering darkness. Its steady current never rested. Tomorrow, long before sunrise, the fishermen would once again wake to its familiar whisper. But tonight, the river watched over sleeping homes, cooling earth, folded nets, and tired hands that had earned their rest beneath the endless Egyptian stars. And as the last warmth of the day slowly faded from the mud brick walls, another quiet life nearby was also preparing for tomorrow's work. A man whose hands did not cast nets into the Nile, but instead held sharp bronze blades with steady care, ready to greet the first light of morning in the humble workshop of an Egyptian barber. Morning returned so gently that it was difficult to notice the exact moment when night became day. The stars faded one after another until only the brightest remained above the western horizon. The eastern sky slowly welcomed pale shades of blue and soft gold. A cool breeze drifted across the village before the day's heat began to rise once more. The Nile reflected the changing sky with quiet beauty. Small ripples caught the first light, making the surface appear as though countless tiny pieces of polished stone floated upon the water. Birds stirred among the reeds, their calls soft and familiar. Somewhere nearby, a donkey shook itself awake, and the faint sound of sandals touching packed earth announced the beginning of another ordinary day. While fishermen gathered their nets beside the river, another worker quietly prepared for his own morning. He was a barber. His home stood only a short walk from the marketplace. Like many houses in the village, it was built from sun-dried mud bricks that kept the inside cooler than the bright world outside. The walls were thick. The roof was made from wooden beams covered with reeds and packed earth. Small openings near the top allowed fresh air to pass through. The barber awoke before sunrise, not because anyone demanded it, but because years of steady routine had shaped his mornings. He sat quietly for a moment, listening. His wife was already grinding grain with slow, steady movements. The familiar sound of stone against stone filled the room. A child still slept peacefully beneath a woven linen covering, one arm resting across a small clay toy shaped like a bird. The barber smiled gently before standing. He washed his face with cool water kept overnight inside a clay jar. The water felt refreshing after the warm night. He combed his own short hair with a carefully carved wooden comb whose smooth teeth had been polished by many years of use. Clean appearance mattered to him. It was part of his work. He dressed in a simple linen kilt that had been washed many times until it became soft and comfortable. Linen was the fabric most people wore throughout Egypt. It breathed well beneath the powerful sun and dried quickly after washing. His tools rested inside a woven basket. He lifted each one carefully. There were bronze razors with curved blades. Several sharpened knives for trimming hair. Small combs made from wood. A smooth stone for sharpening metal edges. Soft linen cloths. Tiny jars filled with scented oils. Nothing looked extravagant. Each tool showed signs of long use and careful repair. Bronze was valuable. A razor was not something to throw away after becoming dull. Instead, it was sharpened again and again until the blade became almost a trusted companion. The barber sat outside his doorway while the village remained quiet. Morning light spread slowly across the rooftops. Before opening his small workspace, he sharpened each blade with patient attention. The bronze whispered against the smooth stone. Back and forth. Back and forth. The sound was almost as peaceful as the flowing river. A sharp blade made the work easier. More importantly, it made the work safer. Ancient Egyptian barbers understood something simple through experience. A dull blade pulled the hair. A sharp one moved cleanly. There were no large mirrors hanging inside most ordinary homes. Polished pieces of bronze sometimes reflected a face, but only softly, with gentle distortions. Most people trusted the barber to guide the work. He knew where to cut. He knew how to shape. He knew how to leave a customer looking neat beneath the Egyptian sun. As the village fully awakened, the first customer arrived. He was a farmer whose day would soon begin in nearby fields. His feet carried fine dust from the road. His hands already showed rough calluses despite the early hour. He greeted the barber with quiet warmth before sitting upon a low wooden stool placed beneath the shade of a broad sycamore tree. Shade was important. Hair cutting beneath direct afternoon sunlight would have been uncomfortable for both men. Morning offered cooler air and softer light. The barber draped a clean linen cloth across the farmer's shoulders. Tiny loose hairs would fall there instead of clinging to clothing. He picked up a comb. Its wooden teeth moved gently through the man's dark hair. There was no hurry. The barber worked with calm confidence. His hands had repeated these same movements thousands of times. Trim. Comb. Pause. Look carefully. Trim again. Each small cut produced only the softest sound. Fine strands drifted quietly toward the ground where the morning breeze carried some of them away. Neither man spoke very much. Silence felt comfortable. Occasionally the farmer mentioned the condition of the irrigation canals. The barber nodded. He had heard that several fields farther north had received plenty of water during the last flood. Such conversations were common. A barber learned much about village life simply by listening. Merchants shared news from nearby towns. Farmers spoke about crops. Builders discussed repairs. Mothers worried gently about growing children. Old men remembered seasons long past. Without leaving his small workplace, the barber quietly collected the everyday stories of an entire community. He was not a scribe writing official records. Nothing was placed upon papyrus. The stories simply floated through the warm air before disappearing like smoke from an evening fire. After trimming the farmer's hair, the barber prepared his bronze razor. He dipped a cloth into cool water. There was no modern soap producing thick foam. Instead, the skin was softened with water and sometimes simple oils that allowed the blade to move more smoothly. The barber gently stretched the man's skin with one hand. With the other, he guided the razor in slow, careful strokes. The blade glided quietly. Every movement demanded attention. A careless moment could leave a cut. Experience made the difference. The barber had spent years learning exactly how much pressure to use. Too little, and the hair remained. Too much, and the skin suffered. The farmer closed his eyes. He trusted the steady hands above him. Nearby, another customer patiently waited beneath the shade. Waiting was part of daily life. People waited beside ovens while bread baked. They waited beside canals while water slowly filled the fields. They waited for boats arriving along the Nile. Waiting quietly felt natural. Soon several more villagers gathered. An elderly fisherman needed his beard trimmed. A young apprentice wanted his hair shortened before beginning work in a carpenter's workshop. A merchant passing through the village stopped to freshen his appearance before continuing north. The barber welcomed each person with the same calm respect. There was little difference between them while they sat upon the stool. Each trusted his hands. Each carried the dust of ordinary life upon sandals and clothing. Each left looking neat and refreshed. The work itself required patience more than speed. Hair was gathered carefully. Beards were shaped little by little. The bronze blades returned often to the sharpening stone. Small cloths wiped away loose hairs. Clay jars of water remained close at hand. The morning passed almost unnoticed. Sunlight slowly shifted beneath the tree. Shadows changed direction. The village marketplace became busier. Women arranged baskets of vegetables upon woven mats. Potters displayed fresh jars still carrying the faint scent of fired clay. Bakers placed warm loaves upon simple wooden boards. The smell of fresh bread drifted gently through the air, mixing with onions, herbs, and smoke from cooking fires. Donkeys wandered patiently between market stalls carrying baskets filled with grain or bundles of flax. Children followed their parents, sometimes helping, sometimes simply watching the busy morning unfold. The barber's small workspace stood quietly among all this gentle movement. It was not the largest place in the market. It did not need to be. Most of his customers already knew where to find him. Many had been visiting him for years. Some had first come as young boys holding their father's hand. Now they arrived with children of their own. Time moved slowly in such places. Faces grew older. Hair turned gray. Children became parents. Yet the familiar rhythm remained. One elderly customer settled carefully onto the stool. His knees moved more slowly than they once had. Deep lines crossed his face, shaped by decades beneath the Egyptian sun. His beard had become long and almost completely white. The barber greeted him warmly. No words were needed for several moments. They had known one another for many years. The barber gently combed the old man's beard. The comb moved with great care, untangling each small knot without causing discomfort. The old man closed his eyes. The feeling was soothing. For a little while, he simply listened to the sounds surrounding him. Birds called from nearby palm trees. Children laughed somewhere across the marketplace. A potter tapped gently against fresh clay. Goats wandered past with tiny bells softly clinking around their necks. The village breathed peacefully around him. The barber trimmed only a little. The beard remained full, but now it appeared cleaner and more orderly. When he finished, he wiped away the loose hairs with a soft linen cloth. The old man smiled quietly. He looked younger, though only by a little. Sometimes that little difference was enough. As the sun climbed higher, the warmth beneath the sycamore tree slowly increased. The barber paused between customers to drink cool water from a clay cup. His hands were beginning to tire. Holding bronze tools hour after hour required steady muscles. His back ached slightly from leaning forward. Still, there was satisfaction in careful work. Every completed haircut carried a quiet sense of accomplishment. Nearby, the fishermen who had returned safely the evening before now walked through the marketplace with baskets containing part of the morning's catch. Several stopped to greet the barber. One laughed softly as he rubbed a hand across his growing beard. "It seems I have found tomorrow's first customer," he said. The barber smiled. "There will always be a place beneath the tree." The fisherman nodded and continued on, his sandals leaving faint prints in the dusty road. The marketplace carried on around them, unhurried and steady beneath the widening Egyptian sky. By the middle of the day, the village seemed to breathe more slowly. The bright morning energy gradually settled into a quieter rhythm as the sun climbed higher above the Nile Valley. The light became almost white, pouring over the mud brick homes and dusty paths until every wall glowed with warmth. The air itself seemed to shimmer gently above the packed earth, and even the smallest movements became slower beneath the growing heat. The barber rested for a short while beneath the wide branches of the sycamore tree. The shade did not remove the heat entirely, but it softened it enough to make the afternoon feel kinder. A faint breeze wandered through the leaves every few minutes, carrying with it the smell of the river and the sweet scent of drying papyrus. He folded a clean linen cloth across his lap and simply watched the marketplace. There was always something peaceful to observe. A woman carefully balanced a clay jar upon her head without using her hands. Her steps were slow and practiced, her feet knowing every uneven place along the familiar road. Two small children followed behind her, each carrying tiny baskets woven from reeds. Their baskets held only a few onions and a handful of herbs, but they carried them with great seriousness, proud to help their family. An elderly potter brushed fine dust from a newly fired water jar before placing it beside several others. Their rounded shapes caught the sunlight, showing gentle shades of brown and red created by the village kiln. Nearby, a carpenter quietly smoothed the edge of a wooden stool using a simple bronze blade. Thin curls of wood drifted onto the ground around his sandals. The smell of fresh cut wood mixed softly with the warm air. Nothing about the marketplace felt hurried. Each person moved with the understanding that there was enough daylight for today's work. Beyond the village, fields stretched toward the river in long green strips separated by narrow irrigation channels. Farmers continued tending their crops despite the heat. Some carried water using balanced poles across their shoulders. Others carefully checked young plants for signs that they needed more moisture. The flood season had long shaped every rhythm of life here. When the Nile rose each year, it spread rich black soil across the fields. After the waters slowly returned to their banks, the earth became dark, soft, and full of life. Farmers planted their crops with hope, trusting that the river had once again given them another season. The barber had never owned fields of his own. His work belonged to the village instead. He depended upon the people around him, just as they depended upon one another. Payment did not always come in the same form. One customer might leave a small basket of grain. Another might bring fresh fish. A farmer could offer onions, beans, or lettuce after harvest. Sometimes a neighbor repaired part of the barber's roof in exchange for many months of careful haircuts. The village was woven together through quiet acts of shared work. As the afternoon continued, another customer approached. This time it was a young stone worker from a nearby building site. His shoulders were broad from lifting heavy limestone blocks. Pale dust covered nearly every part of his body, settling into the folds of his linen clothing and clinging to his arms like fine powder. Even after washing in the river, stone dust seemed to remain. He greeted the barber politely before lowering himself onto the wooden stool. The barber noticed several tiny cuts along the man's hands. Such marks were common among builders. The worker smiled with quiet embarrassment. "My wife says my hair carries more stone than the workshop." The barber nodded gently. "It has worked as hard as you have." The young man closed his eyes as the comb moved through his thick hair. Small clouds of pale dust drifted down with every careful stroke. The barber brushed them away before reaching for his bronze scissors. The steady rhythm returned. Trim. Comb. Pause. Look. Trim again. The sounds around them faded into the background. Only the soft scrape of bronze and the whisper of falling hair remained close. The young builder relaxed beneath the shade. For a little while, his hands no longer carried heavy stone. His shoulders no longer strained beneath great blocks. He simply rested. Perhaps that was another quiet gift offered by the barber's work. For a short time, tired people could sit still. No fields demanded planting. No fishing nets required lifting. No clay needed shaping. No bricks needed carrying. Only patience remained. A small cat wandered lazily through the marketplace. Its fur was sandy brown, almost the same color as the dusty road. It paused beneath the barber's stool, curled into a neat circle, and closed its eyes. No one disturbed it. The cat seemed to understand that this was a peaceful place. Children passed nearby, careful not to wake it. One little girl carried a bundle of freshly washed linen hanging over her shoulder. She slowed as she watched the barber work. The careful movements fascinated her. She had seen them many times before, yet they never seemed exactly the same. Every head of hair grew differently. Every beard followed its own pattern. The barber noticed her watching and smiled kindly. She smiled back before continuing toward her family's home. Across the marketplace, voices remained soft. People bargained with quiet respect. A merchant unrolled lengths of woven linen cloth for a customer to examine. The fabric fluttered gently whenever the breeze returned. A basket maker carefully arranged new baskets of many sizes outside his workshop. Some were small enough to carry herbs. Others were large enough to hold grain after harvest. Each one had required countless patient movements of skilled hands. The barber often admired such craftsmanship. He understood what it meant to repeat careful motions day after day. Many kinds of work shared the same quiet rhythm. As the sun slowly began its journey westward, shadows lengthened little by little. The fierce brightness softened. The air became easier to breathe. More customers arrived. Several had waited until the hottest part of the day had passed. An older fisherman stepped beneath the tree, carrying a neatly folded fishing net over one shoulder. His beard had grown thick during several weeks of busy work upon the river. The barber welcomed him warmly. The fisherman settled onto the stool with a tired sigh. "How has the Nile treated you?" the barber asked softly. The fisherman looked toward the distant river, where a ribbon of blue could still be seen beyond the palms. "She has been generous this week." The barber nodded. "The village will sleep well tonight." As he carefully trimmed the fisherman's beard, tiny silver hairs drifted downward onto the waiting cloth. The fisherman spoke quietly about the changing currents near a patch of reeds farther south. He described a family of herons that seemed to return every season. He mentioned seeing young crocodiles resting upon muddy banks far from the village. The barber listened carefully. Though his work kept him close to the marketplace, these conversations allowed him to travel through the stories of others. Each customer carried a small piece of the wider world. A merchant described distant villages. A farmer spoke of fertile fields. A fisherman brought the sound of open water. A scribe mentioned the busy courtyards of larger towns. The barber collected these gentle stories as naturally as he gathered fallen hair from the ground. The afternoon slowly faded toward evening. Birdsong returned as the heat lessened. Palm leaves rustled more often. The smell of fresh bread once again drifted from nearby ovens. Women carried home the last purchases from the marketplace. Children finished helping their parents before racing together along the dusty paths, their laughter floating through the warm air like birds returning to their nests. The barber cleaned his tools with great care. Each bronze blade was wiped with linen. The combs were washed in cool water. The sharpening stone was brushed free of fine metal dust. He examined every razor closely before placing it back into the woven basket. These simple tools had served him faithfully throughout another day. With proper care, they would continue serving him for many years. As the marketplace gradually emptied, the quiet became deeper. The carpenter closed his workshop. The potter stacked unsold jars beneath a reed shelter. The basket maker carried his finest baskets indoors before the evening dew could settle upon them. One by one, the workers returned home. The barber lifted his basket and began the short walk through the village. The packed earth still held warmth beneath his sandals. Small lamps flickered inside homes as families prepared their evening meals. Smoke curled gently upward into a sky slowly changing from pale blue to soft gold. He passed the fishermen's homes near the riverbank. Several men sat together repairing nets in the fading light. Their fingers moved steadily, tying fresh knots while quietly sharing stories from the day's work. Nearby, children played with tiny reed boats in the shallow water close to shore. They laughed whenever the little boats drifted away upon the gentle current. Their games copied the lives they saw every day. Perhaps one of those children would become a fisherman. Another might shape clay into jars. One could become a scribe, carefully writing upon papyrus. Another might one day sit beneath the same sycamore tree, holding bronze razors with steady hands, welcoming neighbors whose fathers and grandfathers had once rested in that very place. The barber paused for a moment beside the Nile before returning home. The river had become calm again. Its surface reflected the first evening stars. A lone fishing boat drifted quietly toward the village, its crew rowing with slow, even strokes after a long day upon the water. The sound of their oars blended softly with the gentle whisper of the current. The barber stood listening. The river asked nothing. It simply continued its endless journey through the valley, just as it had for countless generations. Tomorrow morning, before the first birds greeted the sunrise, the fishermen would once again prepare their worn nets. The farmers would walk toward their fields. The bakers would light their ovens. The potters would shape fresh clay. And the barber would once more sit beneath the broad branches of the sycamore tree, carefully sharpening his bronze blades in the cool light of dawn, ready to greet another peaceful day in the quiet rhythm of ancient Egypt. Night rested gently over the village once again. The last voices of the marketplace had faded into quiet conversation inside family homes. Small oil lamps glowed through open doorways, their soft light falling across packed earth floors and mud brick walls that still held a little warmth from the day's sun. Beyond the houses, the Nile moved through the darkness with its familiar, steady whisper, never pausing, never hurrying. Above, the stars spread across the wide Egyptian sky. Without bright lights to soften them, they seemed endless. They reflected faintly upon the river, where the current carried tiny ripples downstream. A cool breeze wandered through the palm trees, stirring their long leaves with a sound like distant, gentle rain. Inside the barber's home, the evening meal had almost ended. A clay bowl of lentils rested near the center of the room. Pieces of coarse bread had been broken and shared among the family. A few onions remained beside a small dish of herbs, and a little roasted fish, traded from one of the fishermen earlier that day, completed the simple supper. The barber's wife carefully gathered the empty bowls. She washed them using water from a clay jar, rubbing each one with clean sand before rinsing it again. The smooth pottery had served the family for many years. Some bowls carried tiny chips along their edges, quiet reminders of countless shared meals. Their young son watched closely. He was old enough to notice how every task was done, but still young enough to ask gentle questions about almost everything. "Did many people come today?" he asked softly. The barber smiled as he folded one of his linen cloths. "Enough to keep my hands busy." The boy nodded. He liked imagining all the different people who visited beneath the sycamore tree. Sometimes fishermen. Sometimes farmers. Sometimes builders with dusty hair. Sometimes travelers who carried stories from villages farther along the Nile. The barber often returned home with small conversations that painted quiet pictures of places he himself had never seen. After the meal, the family stepped outside for a little while. Many villagers enjoyed these cooler evening hours. The heat of the day slowly slipped away, replaced by comfortable air that invited people outdoors. Neighbors greeted one another quietly. Older men sat upon low stools beside their homes. Women finished mending linen clothing beneath the fading light. Children, though growing sleepy, still found enough energy for one last game before bedtime. The barber sat upon a simple reed mat near his doorway. He looked toward the river. Several fishing boats rested safely upon the muddy bank, pulled well above the water's edge. Their nets hung nearby, stretched across wooden frames so they could dry completely before morning. From a distance, the nets resembled delicate spider webs shining faintly beneath the moonlight. One fisherman remained awake, quietly repairing a small tier. His hands moved slowly, almost lazily now that the pressure of the day had passed. Loop. Pull. Tighten. The familiar rhythm continued beneath the stars. Not far away, another family prepared bread for tomorrow. The grain had already been ground earlier in the afternoon. Now water was slowly mixed into the flour inside a large clay bowl. Patient hands kneaded the dough until it became smooth and soft. Bread required time. Nothing about it could be rushed. The dough would rest overnight before meeting the warmth of the morning oven. Throughout Egypt, this simple rhythm repeated itself every evening. Thousands of families quietly prepared for tomorrow before sleeping. The barber's wife brought out a small basket containing torn pieces of linen. Nothing useful was thrown away. Old clothing became cleaning cloths. Worn cloth could be sewn into patches. Even tiny scraps sometimes found another purpose. She carefully repaired a tear in one of the barber's work cloths using a bronze needle and strong flax thread. Each careful stitch helped the fabric serve another season. The barber watched with quiet appreciation. His own work depended upon steady hands. So did hers. The moon climbed higher. Its pale light softened the outlines of every house. Palm trees became dark shapes against the sky. The air smelled faintly of cooling earth and damp riverbanks. Somewhere nearby, a flute began to play. The music was gentle and unhurried. Only a few simple notes drifted across the village before fading once more into silence. No audience gathered. The musicians simply played for the peaceful evening. The barber closed his eyes for a moment. He listened. The river. The breeze. The distant flute. A quiet conversation between neighbors. The soft crackle of a dying cooking fire. These were the sounds that ended most days. When at last the family returned inside, the oil lamp was trimmed carefully to save precious fuel. The flame became smaller. Shadows grew softer upon the walls. Sleeping mats woven from reeds were unrolled across the floor. Simple linen coverings waited beside them. The barber stretched his tired shoulders before lying down. His hands still remembered every haircut from the day. Though resting now, they carried the memory of bronze combs, sharpened razors, and folded cloths. His muscles welcomed stillness. Outside, the Nile continued its endless journey. Long after every lamp in the village had gone dark, the river remained awake. Its gentle movement shaped the land without asking for praise. Far to the south, fresh water continued flowing toward Egypt. Far to the north, it continued toward the Great Sea. Generation after generation, people built their lives around its faithful rhythm. Morning always returned. So did evening. The barber drifted into sleep. Before long, the stars slowly faded once again. A pale glow touched the eastern horizon. Another day quietly began. The village awakened little by little. A rooster called somewhere beyond the fields. Birds fluttered among the reeds. Smoke rose from the first cooking fires. Women carried fresh water from the Nile before the paths became busy. The barber rose from his sleeping mat with the same calm movements as always. Routine gave comfort. There was no need to wonder what the day would bring. There would be work. There would be conversation. There would be neighbors. There would be the quiet satisfaction of useful hands. He stepped outside while the air was still cool. The sycamore tree stood waiting at the edge of the marketplace, its broad branches already casting long shadows across the ground. Before any customers arrived, he enjoyed these peaceful moments alone. He opened his woven basket. Each bronze blade caught the first light of dawn. He inspected them one by one. A tiny spot of dullness along one edge. A loose wrapping on the handle of another. Nothing serious. Only the ordinary signs of daily use. He sat upon a low stool and began sharpening the first razor. The smooth stone rested comfortably in his lap. The blade moved across it with slow, practiced strokes. Back and forth. Back and forth. Tiny particles of bronze collected upon the stone like fine dust. The sound blended with the quiet morning around him. Soon another worker appeared. Not a customer this time. It was the village scribe. He carried a rolled sheet of fresh papyrus beneath one arm and a small wooden pallet holding cakes of black and red ink. His reed pens were tucked neatly into a cloth case hanging from his shoulder. The scribe greeted the barber warmly before sitting beneath the tree. For a few moments neither man spoke. They simply enjoyed the cool morning together. The scribe watched the careful sharpening. "You care for your blades as I care for my pens," he finally said. The barber smiled. "If our tools fail us, our hands cannot do their work." The scribe nodded thoughtfully. His own hands carried faint dark stains from ink that no amount of washing could completely remove. Every craft left its own quiet marks upon the body. The fisherman carried rope burns. The potter carried clay beneath the fingernails. The carpenter smelled of fresh wood. The baker's arms held traces of flour. The barber's hands carried tiny polished places where bronze handles rested every day. The scribe looked toward the awakening marketplace. Soon he would spend hours recording grain deliveries, counting supplies, and writing careful records for local officials. His work was very different from fishing or cutting hair. Yet it too depended upon patience. No line of writing could be hurried. Every symbol required calm attention. The two men sat together in companionable silence until the first customers began appearing along the dusty road, their sandals leaving familiar footprints in the soft morning earth. The barber placed his freshly sharpened razor back into the basket, folded a clean linen cloth across the waiting stool, and greeted the new day with the same quiet care that had shaped so many peaceful mornings beside the eternal Nile. The first customer of the morning arrived before the marketplace had fully awakened. The light was still soft, and long shadows stretched across the dusty ground. The air carried the cool freshness that would disappear once the sun climbed higher, and for a little while the village belonged to those who rose early. The man approaching the sycamore tree walked with slow, measured steps. He was a reed cutter. His work kept him along the marshy edges of the Nile, where thick forests of papyrus and tall reeds grew from the rich black mud. Day after day, he harvested strong stems that would become many useful things. Some would be woven into baskets. Others would help build roofs or simple boats. The finest papyrus would travel to skilled craftsmen who turned it into smooth writing sheets. His hands told the story of his trade. Tiny scratches crossed his fingers. The skin of his palms had grown firm after years of gripping sharp knives and heavy bundles of reeds. When he reached the barber, he smiled quietly and removed his simple head covering. "My wife says my hair now looks like the reeds themselves," he said with a gentle laugh. The barber smiled. "Then perhaps we should make it look a little more like the river." The reed cutter settled onto the familiar stool. The barber draped a clean linen cloth across his shoulders before gently combing through his thick, sun-bleached hair. Tiny fragments of dried reed fell onto the cloth. The barber brushed them away with careful hands. Every occupation carried small pieces of the workplace home. A fisherman often arrived with the faint scent of river water. A baker carried flour upon his clothing. A potter sometimes brought fine clay dust that settled quietly into every fold of linen. The reed cutter brought the marsh with him. The barber worked patiently. The bronze scissors opened and closed with soft, steady clicks. Birdsong floated through the branches overhead. A dove landed upon one of the lower limbs of the sycamore tree and remained perfectly still, watching the quiet morning below. Neither man disturbed it. As the haircut continued, the reed cutter spoke softly about the river. "The water has been calm these past mornings," he said. The papyrus is growing tall. The barber nodded. That is good for everyone. It truly was. Strong papyrus meant better baskets. Better baskets carried more grain. Fresh writing sheets meant scribes could continue recording harvests, letters, and accounts. Even the roofs of simple homes often depended upon bundles of reeds. Nothing in the village stood entirely alone. One person's work quietly supported another's. When the haircut was finished, the reed cutter reached into a small woven pouch. Instead of copper or grain, he offered several beautifully woven reed mats. They were no larger than folded cloths, carefully made with even rows and neat edges. My daughter helped weave these, he said. The barber accepted them with gratitude. They will serve our home well. The exchange felt natural. No bargain was needed. Both men understood the value of patient work. The reed cutter continued toward the marshes while the barber carefully rolled the mats and placed them inside his home for safekeeping. The morning slowly grew brighter. The marketplace welcomed more people. Women arranged baskets filled with figs, onions, beans, garlic, and fresh herbs gathered from nearby gardens. The sweet smell of dates mixed with the warm scent of baking bread. A donkey carrying clay jars paused beneath a palm tree while its owner adjusted the ropes securing the load. Nearby, several young boys helped an elderly basket maker carry fresh work to his stall. Each basket looked slightly different. Some were wide and shallow. Others were deep enough to carry harvested grain. The smallest could hold spices or sewing tools. Their woven patterns reminded the barber of fishing nets. Different crafts often shared the same quiet beauty. A little later, a familiar figure appeared at the edge of the marketplace. It was one of the fishermen. His face had grown darker from long hours beneath the sun, and his shoulders were broad from rowing against the current. Today he carried no nets. Instead, he held the hand of a small boy who could not have been more than 6 years old. The child's eyes wandered everywhere. He watched birds. He watched donkeys. He watched merchants arranging goods. Everything seemed new. The fisherman smiled. This young one has asked for a haircut all week. The boy looked down shyly. The barber crouched so they were nearly the same height. Is this your first time sitting beneath my tree? The child nodded. It is. Then we shall take our time. The little boy climbed carefully onto the stool. His feet did not reach the ground. The barber folded the linen cloth gently around his shoulders. The boy looked very serious. His father rested one reassuring hand upon the back of the stool. There was no fear. Only curiosity. The barber began slowly. The wooden comb moved through the child's soft hair. The scissors followed with quiet care. Tiny locks drifted gently downward like feathers. The boy remained wonderfully still. Every now and then he looked toward his father, who smiled with quiet pride. When the haircut was complete, the barber held up a polished bronze mirror. The reflection shimmered softly. It was not perfectly clear. The bronze showed gentle waves and faint distortions. Still, the little boy smiled. He touched his neatly trimmed hair with both hands. It feels different. It is lighter, the barber replied. The fisherman thanked him warmly. As they walked away together, the child occasionally reached up to feel his hair cut again, smiling each time. The barber watched them disappear into the marketplace. Moments like these pleased him. He had once trimmed the father's hair when he himself had been only a young boy. Now another generation had taken the same seat beneath the sycamore tree. Time flowed quietly through the village, much like the Nile itself. By late morning, the warmth settled over the land once more. The shadows beneath the tree became smaller. The barber paused to drink from his clay cup. Nearby, the village well became busy. Although the Nile provided abundant water, wells offered convenience for many households. Women gathered there carrying clay jars, exchanging gentle conversation while waiting their turn. Children helped where they could. Some carried smaller jars. Others carefully swept around the well to keep the area clean. A grandmother patiently taught her granddaughter how to balance a jar upon folded cloth placed atop her head. The little girl laughed when the empty jar slipped sideways. The older woman laughed too. Learning took time. Everything worth doing seemed to require patience. Not far from the well, the scent of fresh bread grew stronger. The village baker had opened a clay oven. Warm loaves emerged one after another using a long wooden paddle. The crusts carried beautiful shades of golden brown. Steam rose gently into the morning air. People passing by smiled almost without thinking. Fresh bread always carried comfort. The barber would often trade haircuts for bread during busy weeks. His family appreciated those exchanges. Bread appeared at nearly every meal. It was broken by hand, shared among relatives, dipped into stews, or eaten with onions and herbs beneath the evening sky. Simple food sustains simple lives. As the barber welcomed another customer to the stool, he noticed movement near the riverbank. Several fishermen were preparing their boats for tomorrow. Although today's work had not yet ended, tomorrow had already begun in their minds. They carefully inspected each rope. They folded every net neatly. They checked wooden oars for cracks. The boats rested quietly upon the shore, waiting for another early departure beneath the stars. The barber understood this habit well. He too prepared today for tomorrow. Every sharpened razor, every washed cloth, every repaired comb, every careful habit made the next morning easier. Routine was not dull. It was comforting. It allowed life to flow gently from one sunrise to the next without confusion or haste. The breeze shifted slightly. For a moment it carried the cool scent of the Nile all the way into the marketplace. The barber paused, breathing deeply. Somewhere beyond the palms, water touched the shore with its endless, peaceful rhythm. It was the same sound the fishermen had heard before dawn. The same sound children fell asleep listening to each night. The same sound that had welcomed generations before them and would welcome generations still to come. The village carried on beneath its quiet music. And under the broad branches of the old sycamore tree, the barber picked up his comb once more, ready to greet the next familiar face with the same gentle patience that had become the steady heartbeat of his days. The morning slowly gave way to another peaceful afternoon. The sunlight settled gently across the Nile Valley, warming the mud brick walls until they glowed with soft shades of gold and pale brown. The roads through the village became quieter for a little while, as many people sought shade beneath trees, reached shelters, or the cool interiors of their homes. Even the animals seemed to understand the rhythm of the day. Goats rested beneath low walls. Donkeys stood patiently beneath palm trees, flicking their tails now and then to brush away small flies. The barber remained beneath the wide branches of the old sycamore. Its leaves whispered softly whenever the breeze wandered through them. Tiny patches of sunlight danced upon the ground, shifting little by little as the afternoon passed. There were no customers for a short time. He welcomed the quiet. He reached into his woven basket and removed each of his tools, laying them neatly upon a folded linen cloth. The bronze razors caught the sunlight. Some were newer than others. One blade had belonged to his father. The handle had become smooth from many years of careful use. The bronze itself had been sharpened so often that its shape had slowly changed over time. It was a little narrower than when it had first been made, but its edge remained reliable. The barber gently traced one finger along the back of the blade. Not the sharp edge. Only the smooth spine. He remembered watching his father care for the very same razor many years before. As a child, he had often sat nearby while customers came and went throughout the day. He had listened without fully understanding the conversations. He had watched hair fall onto the dusty ground. He had seen his father wipe each blade clean before carefully placing it back into the basket. At first, his father had allowed him only small tasks. Fetching fresh water. Folding clean cloths. Sweeping away loose hair after each customer. The boy had performed these jobs with great seriousness. Every small task felt important. Only after many seasons had his father finally allowed him to hold one of the wooden combs. Even then, he practiced only upon bundles of flax tied together to resemble thick hair. Comb slowly. Do not pull. Move gently. His father had spoken very few words. He taught mostly by example. Years later came the scissors. Only after much practice did the young apprentice begin trimming simple hair beneath his father's watchful eyes. There had been no rush. Every lesson arrived when it was needed. The barber smiled quietly at the memory. Now he himself had become the older craftsman. Time had carried him gently into the place once held by his father. Nearby, two young boys chased one another across the edge of the marketplace. Their laughter floated through the warm air before fading again into the peaceful afternoon. One carried a tiny reed boat. The other held a small carved wooden fish. Perhaps later they would race the little boat along the shallow edge of the Nile. Children often copied the work they saw around them. Some pretended to fish using strings tied to sticks. Others built tiny mud houses complete with miniature ovens. Little girls sometimes shaped pretend bread from damp river mud before placing it beneath warm stones. Play quietly reflected daily life. Not far away, an elderly woman sat spinning flax into thread. Her hands moved with remarkable steadiness despite her age. A bundle of pale flax fibers rested beside her. With patient fingers she drew out a few strands at a time, twisting them gently into fine thread. The spindle turned slowly. Round and round. Again and again. The work required neither great strength nor great speed. Only patience. The barber often admired such work. He understood that many useful things came into the world not through sudden effort, but through countless small movements repeated over many hours. A fishing net. A linen garment. A woven basket. A clay jar. Even a carefully shaped beard. All depended upon patient hands. The quiet afternoon was interrupted only by the slow arrival of another customer. This man walked with careful steps. His hair had grown almost completely white. His beard reached the middle of his chest. His face carried deep lines formed by many years beneath the Egyptian sun. The barber stood to greet him warmly. The old man had once been a boat builder. Although his hands had become slower with age, they still carried the memory of shaping wood into graceful river vessels. His fingers remained broad and strong. Tiny scars crossed both palms. The barber guided him gently onto the stool beneath the sycamore. "You have been busy," the barber said with a kind smile, looking at the long beard. The old man chuckled softly. "My grandchildren say birds may soon begin nesting in it." The barber laughed quietly with him. "Then we should make certain they choose another tree." The old man settled comfortably while the barber wrapped the familiar linen cloth around his shoulders. The comb moved carefully through the long white beard. Years ago, the old man had built several of the fishing boats still resting beside the Nile. He remembered selecting sturdy logs brought from distant places. He remembered smoothing rough planks with bronze tools. He remembered bending over curved hulls beneath the hot afternoon sun. Every boat had been slightly different. Some carried fishermen. Some transported grain. Others served merchants traveling between villages. He spoke quietly while the barber worked. The river teaches builders many things. The barber nodded. What does it teach? The old man looked toward the distant Nile. Never fight the water. Learn how it wishes to carry you. For a little while, neither man spoke. The words lingered peacefully beneath the tree. Perhaps they were true for more than boats. Life itself seemed easier when people moved gently with its natural rhythm. The barber trimmed the beard little by little. No hurried cuts. No sudden movements. Only slow, careful work. Small white hairs drifted onto the waiting cloth. When the trimming was complete, the barber wiped the old man's face with a cool linen towel dampened from the clay water jar. The old man sighed with quiet comfort. The cool cloth felt refreshing after the warm afternoon. He looked into the polished bronze mirror. Its reflection shimmered gently. He smiled. I almost recognized the younger man. The barber smiled too. Perhaps he has simply been waiting beneath the beard. The old man rose carefully, stretching his back before thanking the barber. Instead of grain or fish, he offered something different. From a cloth bundle he removed a beautifully carved wooden comb. Its smooth surface had been polished with careful attention. Along its handle were tiny carvings of papyrus flowers and gentle waves. I made this years ago, he said. My hands no longer carve as steadily. I would be honored to use it, the barber replied. He accepted the gift with both hands. The comb felt warm from the afternoon sun. He ran his thumb gently across the carved handle. Every line spoke of patient craftsmanship. Long after the old boat builder had disappeared along the dusty road, the barber continued looking at the comb. He imagined the many quiet hours spent shaping it. Carefully cutting each tooth. Smoothing every edge. Polishing the wood until it felt soft in the hand. No hurry. Only steady work. The afternoon slowly leaned toward evening. The heat softened. A breeze returned from the river. Palm leaves rustled with fresh energy. Children began appearing again in the open spaces of the village after resting during the hottest hours. Some carried little baskets to help their parents collect vegetables. Others ran toward the riverbank, eager to watch the fishermen preparing for tomorrow's journey. Along the shore, nets were spread carefully across wooden frames. The fishermen examined every knot. One man found a weak place no larger than his thumb. He immediately sat down upon the ground and began repairing it. He understood that a tiny tear ignored today could become a large hole tomorrow. The barber watched from a distance. Their work was different. Yet somehow it felt very much the same. A dull razor. A torn net. A cracked clay jar. A loose sandal strap. Small problems quietly asked for patient attention before they became larger ones. As the first long shadows stretched across the village, the scent of evening meals slowly filled the air. Fresh bread emerged from ovens. Lentils simmered gently in clay pots. Fish roasted over glowing coals. Families gathered little by little, their conversations soft and unhurried. The barber carefully wrapped the carved wooden comb in a clean piece of linen before placing it safely inside his basket. Tomorrow it would greet its first customer. It would pass gently through another head of hair, beginning a new chapter in its quiet life. Above the village, the sky slowly turned from bright blue to warm amber. The Nile reflected every changing color without a sound. Its peaceful current carried the fading light downstream, just as it had carried countless evenings before, while ordinary people finished another day of honest work beneath the timeless sky of ancient Egypt. The evening settled over the village with the quiet certainty of an old friend. The last warmth of the sun lingered upon the mud brick walls, but the air had already begun to cool. A gentle breeze wandered inland from the Nile, carrying the fresh scent of water mixed with damp earth and tall reeds. It brushed softly through the palm trees, making their long leaves whisper together high above the sleeping paths. The marketplace, so full of quiet movement only a short while before, slowly emptied. Merchants folded woven cloths and placed them inside wooden chests. Potters carried the few unsold jars back beneath the shelter of their workshops. Basket makers stacked their work neatly against the walls of their homes, where it would remain dry until morning. The barber walked home at an easy pace. His woven basket rested comfortably against his side. Inside were his bronze razors, carefully wrapped in linen, his sharpening stone, his wooden combs, and now the beautifully carved comb given to him by the old boat builder. He smiled each time he thought about the gift. Some objects became more valuable with time, not because they were rare, but because they carried the patient work of familiar hands. As he passed through the village, he greeted neighbors quietly. An elderly woman watered a few herbs growing beside her doorway. A young mother gently rocked her sleepy child while sitting on a low mud brick bench outside her home. Two brothers carried bundles of firewood together, their steps matching without either one needing to speak. Simple evenings often held the deepest feeling of peace. The day's labor had ended. Tomorrow's work had not yet begun. For a little while, everyone rested between those two moments. When the barber reached his home, the smell of fresh bread welcomed him before he even stepped through the doorway. His wife had already removed several small loaves from the clay oven. The crusts were lightly browned, and tiny wisps of steam still rose from cracks along their tops. She placed one loaf upon a woven mat to cool. Their son sat nearby, carefully sorting dried beans into a clay bowl. He counted them quietly, not because anyone had asked him to, but because children often found small ways to help without being told. The barber placed his basket beside the wall. His wife noticed the carved comb almost immediately. She lifted it carefully. "It is beautiful. The old boat builder gave it to me." She ran her fingers gently across the carved papyrus flowers. "He must have spent many evenings making this." "I think he did." The comb was passed carefully to their son. The boy turned it over in both hands. He traced each carved line with quiet curiosity. "Will you use it tomorrow?" "I will." "Will everyone know it is new?" The barber smiled. "Perhaps only those who notice small things." The boy nodded thoughtfully. Children often notice the smallest details. Outside, darkness slowly gathered. One by one, tiny oil lamps appeared throughout the village. Their warm light shone through open doorways, creating little islands of golden color surrounded by the deep blue of evening. Some families remained outdoors while the air stayed pleasant. Others gathered inside around simple meals. The sounds drifting through the village were gentle. Quiet conversation. Soft laughter. A baby's sleepy cry. The distant creaking of a wooden cart being pushed beneath the stars. The low call of night birds beginning their watch along the river. After supper, the barber and his family walked together toward the Nile. Many villagers did the same. The riverbank became a peaceful meeting place during the cool hours after sunset. Children skipped smooth stones across the shallow water. Older people sat upon flat rocks, watching the current flow past. Fishermen finished tying their boats for the night. One elderly fisherman checked each rope twice. The barber watched him with quiet admiration. Even after many years, careful habits remained. The old fisherman noticed him. "You are out for the evening. The air is too pleasant to stay indoors." The fisherman nodded. "The river agrees." For a while they stood together without speaking. The Nile hardly seemed to notice them. It simply continued its endless journey beneath the stars. Tiny insects danced above the surface. A fish rose briefly, leaving only a circle of ripples before disappearing again into the dark water. Far across the river, a small lamp glowed from another village. Its light trembled softly upon the current. The barber wondered about the people living there. Perhaps another barber sharpened bronze razors beneath another tree. Perhaps another fisherman repaired nets beside another muddy shore. Life along the Nile often followed the same gentle rhythm, village after village. Different faces. Different homes. The same river. The same rising sun. The same evening breeze. Nearby, several children had gathered around an older storyteller. He sat upon a woven mat with his hands resting comfortably upon his knees. His voice was calm. No grand adventures filled his stories tonight. Instead, he spoke about animals that visited the river during different seasons. He described the quiet patience of herons standing in shallow water. He spoke of turtles warming themselves upon smooth rocks in the morning sun. He reminded the children never to wander too close to places where crocodiles rested. The children listened carefully. Every now and then one asked a gentle question. The storyteller answered with patient kindness. The barber smiled. Stories, like tools, were passed from one generation to another. Not through hurried lessons. Through evenings like this. Through quiet voices beneath open skies. As the night deepened, families gradually returned home. The lamps along the riverbank disappeared one after another. Only the stars remained. Back inside his house, the barber prepared for tomorrow. He unfolded a clean linen cloth and carefully arranged his tools upon it. One razor. A second razor. The wooden combs. The carved comb. The scissors. The sharpening stone. He examined every piece slowly. One razor needed only a few strokes across the stone. Another required a little more attention. The carved comb received a light rubbing with a soft cloth until the polished wood shone gently in the lamplight. His son watched quietly. "Why do you clean them every night?" The barber thought for a moment before answering. "Because tomorrow they should be ready before I ask them to work." The boy considered the answer carefully. It made sense. Many things in the village followed that idea. The fishermen folded their nets before sleeping. The baker prepared dough the night before. The farmer checked his tools after sunset. Preparation itself became part of the day's work. When everything was finished, the barber wrapped the tools once more inside clean linen and placed them back into the basket. The lamp burned lower. Outside, the village had grown almost silent. Only an occasional footstep crossed the road. Somewhere a donkey shifted gently in its sleep. The breeze carried the scent of the river through the doorway. The family spread their reed sleeping mats across the cool floor. The barber lay quietly, listening. He could hear the Nile. Even from here. Not loudly. Only enough to remind him that the river never truly slept. Long after every person in the village had closed their eyes, the water continued flowing. Long after tomorrow's sunrise, it would still be flowing. Long after his own hands no longer held bronze razors, the river would continue carrying boats, fishermen, merchants, and children along its patient course. These thoughts brought him comfort rather than sadness. There was peace in belonging to something so steady. The stars slowly crossed the sky. The night grew deeper. Then, little by little, another dawn approached. Before the first light touched the eastern horizon, another familiar figure was already awake. Not a fisherman. Not a barber. This morning belonged to one of the village bakers, whose quiet work began while almost everyone else was still asleep, when only the stars, the cooling earth, and the gentle whisper of the Nile kept him company as he prepared the first bread of a new day. Long before the first birds welcomed the coming day, the village still rested beneath a blanket of quiet darkness. The stars were bright above the Nile, scattered across the sky like tiny lamps that had been carefully placed there one by one. The moon had already begun its slow journey toward the western horizon, leaving behind a cool silver light that rested softly upon the river. The air felt different at this hour. It was fresh. The heat that had filled the valley during the afternoon had disappeared, and the earth released its warmth little by little into the night. The mud brick walls of the houses felt cool beneath the touch of the breeze, and even the dusty roads seemed calm, as though they too were sleeping. Most of the village remained wrapped in dreams. Families rested together upon woven reed mats. Oil lamps had long since burned low. Clay jars of water stood quietly beside doorways, waiting for thirsty hands when morning arrived. Only a few people were awake. Among them was the baker. His work always began while darkness still covered the valley. He rose without hurry, just as he had done almost every morning of his life. For a few quiet moments he sat upon the edge of his sleeping mat, listening. The Nile whispered somewhere beyond the rows of houses. A night bird called once from the reeds. Then silence returned. He stretched his shoulders slowly. The muscles of his arms had grown strong through years of kneading heavy dough. His hands were broad, with flour settled so deeply into the tiny lines of his skin that even careful washing never removed every trace. They were the hands of someone who worked with grain every day. His wife was already awake. She smiled softly as she added another small bundle of dry reeds beside the clay oven outside their home. She understood the rhythm of the bakery as well as he did. Without speaking very much, they worked together. Some mornings did not require many words. The dough had been prepared the evening before. Inside a large clay bowl it had rested through the night beneath a linen cloth. The baker gently folded back the covering. The dough had changed. It looked softer now. Smoother. It had quietly become ready while everyone else slept. He pressed one finger lightly into its surface. The dough slowly rose again. He nodded with quiet satisfaction. Nearby, the clay oven waited. Its rounded shape stood almost as tall as the baker himself. Years of steady use had darkened its opening with smoke. Tiny cracks crossed its outer surface, carefully repaired whenever they appeared. Like nearly everything in the village, it was maintained rather than replaced. The baker gathered dry reeds, small branches, and pieces of wood saved from carpenters' workshops. Nothing useful was wasted. He arranged the fuel carefully inside the oven. Then he struck together two small pieces of flint. A tiny spark appeared. Another. Soon a faint thread of smoke drifted upward into the dark sky. The fire slowly found its strength. There was no sudden blaze. Only patient warmth. The baker waited. Bread required patience from beginning to end. While the oven heated, he washed his hands in cool water from a clay jar. He dried them upon a clean linen cloth before returning to the waiting dough. He divided it into small portions. Each piece was weighed not with scales, but with experience. His hands already knew. Too large. Too small. Just right. One after another, smooth round loaves began to appear upon a wooden board dusted lightly with flour. Some were flat. Others slightly thicker. Different families preferred different shapes. The baker remembered them all. One elderly couple liked smaller loaves that stayed soft for longer. A fisherman with 5 children always asked for larger ones. The barber usually traded for 2 medium-sized loaves every few days. The baker smiled as he thought of his neighbors. Each loaf already seemed to know whose table it would soon reach. The first faint glow of dawn appeared far beyond the eastern desert. The stars remained overhead, but their light had begun to soften. The fire inside the oven glowed warmly now. The baker tested the heat by placing one hand near the opening. Not too close. Just close enough to feel the warmth. Experience guided him. No measuring tools were needed. He gently placed the first loaves inside. One by one they disappeared into the glowing oven. The smell came slowly at first. Warm grain. Fresh dough. Wood smoke. Together they created one of the most comforting scents in the village. Soon the fragrance drifted through nearby streets. It slipped beneath doorways. It floated toward the riverbank. People still asleep would soon notice it without even opening their eyes. Fresh bread announced the beginning of another day. As the loaves baked, the baker remained close. He never wandered far. The oven required attention. Too much heat could darken the crust. Too little left the center unfinished. Every few moments he looked inside. The surfaces slowly changed color. Pale dough became soft gold. Then deeper brown. Tiny cracks appeared where steam escaped. The baker smiled quietly. Each loaf had its own small differences. None were exactly alike. Nearby, another familiar figure appeared along the dusty road. It was the barber. He carried his woven basket as always. The carved wooden comb rested safely inside beside the bronze razors. Seeing the baker already awake, he raised one hand in greeting. "You have beaten the sunrise again." The baker chuckled softly. "The bread always wishes to wake before the people." The barber stepped closer. The warm smell of baking bread surrounded them. "It smells wonderful. The first loaves will be ready soon." For a few peaceful moments they stood together watching the fire. The village around them remained mostly asleep. Smoke rose gently into the brightening sky. A donkey shifted quietly beneath a nearby shelter. The Nile continued flowing unseen beyond the houses. These calm moments before sunrise belonged to the workers who prepared the village for the day ahead. Soon the baker removed the first finished loaves using a long wooden paddle. Steam rose into the cool morning air. The crusts crackled softly as they cooled. The barber breathed in the warm scent. It reminded him of nearly every morning he had ever known. The baker placed 2 loaves aside. "These are for your family." The barber smiled. "I will bring your haircut after the harvest festival." The exchange required no written agreement. Both men trusted one another. Trust, like bread, had been shaped over many years. As daylight slowly spread across the rooftops, the village awakened. Doors opened. Children rubbed sleepy eyes. Women came carrying clay jars for fresh water. The fishermen appeared along the riverbank, preparing once again to push their narrow boats into the Nile. The baker continued working steadily. Fresh loaves emerged from the oven. New ones entered. The rhythm never hurried. Near his bakery, people began gathering. Some brought baskets of onions. Others carried beans, grain, or bundles of herbs to exchange. Warm bread passed from the baker's hands into theirs. Soon the smell spread through every corner of the village. Breakfast began inside dozens of homes. Bread was broken. Onions were sliced. Fresh fish from yesterday's catch appeared beside simple bowls of lentils. Families gathered together before another day of work. The barber carried his 2 warm loaves home. His son met him at the doorway with a wide smile. The bread is still warm. It came straight from the oven. The boy gently touched the crust. It feels alive. The barber laughed softly. In a way, it is. His wife carefully wrapped one loaf in linen to keep it fresh. The other she broke immediately. Steam escaped into the room. She passed pieces to each family member. The bread needed nothing more. Its warmth was enough. Outside, sunlight now filled the village completely. The sycamore tree cast its familiar shade across the marketplace. The barber gathered his basket once more. The carved comb rested beside the others, waiting for another day's quiet work. As he walked toward the tree, the village settled into its gentle rhythm once again. The fishermen moved toward the river. The farmers toward the fields. The potters toward their wheels. The scribes toward their papyrus. The baker toward another waiting batch of dough. And beneath the peaceful sky of ancient Egypt, the ordinary lives of countless humble people continued to flow together as steadily as the timeless waters of the Nile. The morning unfolded with the slow confidence of a river that had followed the same path for countless generations. Sunlight spread across the valley in gentle layers. First it touched the tops of the palm trees. Then it reached the flat roofs of the mud brick homes. Little by little it warmed the narrow streets, the quiet workshops, and the busy marketplace until the whole village seemed to wake beneath a blanket of golden light. The barber had already settled beneath the broad sycamore tree. Its thick trunk carried the marks of many years. Deep grooves crossed the bark, and broad roots reached into the earth below, drinking quietly from the rich soil that the Nile renewed season after season. The tree had watched generations pass. Children who once climbed its lower branches had grown into fishermen, potters, scribes, and mothers. Older people who had rested beneath its shade had long since become gentle memories spoken of by their grandchildren. Yet the sycamore remained. Its leaves whispered softly whenever the breeze arrived from the river. The barber unfolded a fresh linen cloth across his lap. His bronze tools rested neatly beside him. The newly carved comb lay closest to his hand. He smiled each time he saw it. Not because it was the finest comb he owned, but because it carried the kindness of a neighbor whose patient hands had shaped it through many quiet evenings. The first customer arrived carrying the smell of fresh clay. He was a young potter. His linen kilt was dusted with fine reddish powder from the workshop. Tiny streaks of dried clay marked his forearms, and even beneath his fingernails there remained traces of yesterday's work. He greeted the barber warmly. "The wheel has been busy this week." "So have your hands," the barber replied gently. The young man laughed. "I believe the clay follows me everywhere." He settled onto the familiar stool. The barber wrapped the linen cloth around his shoulders before reaching for the carved comb. Its smooth wooden teeth moved easily through the potter's thick hair. The barber noticed at once how comfortable it felt in his hand. The balance was perfect. The old boat builder had understood wood as deeply as the barber understood hair. Different crafts. The same careful attention. As the haircut began, the potter spoke quietly about his workshop. A large order of storage jars had been requested by farmers preparing for the coming harvest. Every jar had to be shaped with care. The walls could not be too thick, nor too thin. Each needed to dry slowly before entering the kiln. Rushing the process almost always ended badly. The barber listened with quiet interest. I imagine patience is your strongest tool. The potter smiled. It is the only tool that never wears out. For a few moments neither man spoke. The only sounds were the soft snip of bronze scissors and the distant calls of birds flying above the river. Nearby, a woman spread freshly washed linen across a rope stretched between two wooden posts. The white cloth caught the morning breeze, moving gently like quiet sails upon invisible water. Several children passed carrying little bundles of papyrus stems gathered from the riverbank. They walked carefully, trying not to drop any. Their father, who worked making baskets, had taught them to choose only the strongest reeds. Even children learned that careful work began with careful choosing. When the haircut was complete, the potter reached into a small cloth bag. Instead of grain or vegetables, he carefully lifted out a tiny clay bowl. It fit easily into the palm of a hand. Its surface had been polished until it felt smooth as river stone. Simple painted lines circled the rim. I made this yesterday. The barber accepted it with both hands. It is beautiful. It is only a small bowl. The barber gently turned it beneath the sunlight. Small things can still be made with great care. The potter nodded. He understood exactly what the barber meant. After the young man departed, the barber placed the bowl beside his basket. It would carry herbs or scented oil at home. Each gift from a neighbor quietly became part of daily life. The morning continued. A merchant traveling between villages stopped beneath the sycamore. Dust covered his sandals from many miles of walking. He carried a bundle of folded linen cloth across one shoulder and a walking staff polished smooth by years of use. Travelers often brought fresh stories. The barber welcomed him onto the stool. "You have come from the north." The merchant nodded. "The wind helped our boat." As the barber trimmed his beard, the traveler spoke softly about villages farther along the Nile. He described wide fields ready for planting. He mentioned seeing enormous flocks of white birds rising together from the marshes at sunrise. He spoke of fishermen repairing boats beside larger towns where the river became crowded with vessels carrying grain. The barber listened carefully. He had never traveled very far from his own village. Yet through the words of merchants, fishermen, and scribes, he quietly gathered pictures of distant places. The Nile connected them all. Different villages. Different faces. The same flowing water. The merchant noticed the carved comb. "It is fine work. A gift. It reminds me of a craftsman I met many years ago." The barber smiled. "Perhaps careful hands recognize one another." The merchant laughed softly. "I believe they do." As the day grew warmer, the marketplace became busier. The baker arrived carrying a basket covered with clean linen. Inside rested several fresh loaves that had cooled after sunrise. The warm scent of bread drifted through the air. People smiled almost without thinking. The baker greeted the barber. "Did your family enjoy this morning's bread?" They did. The dough was especially good. It rested well through the night. The barber nodded. Sometimes the quiet hours do the most important work. The baker considered the thought for a moment before smiling. "I think that is true." He continued through the marketplace, exchanging warm loaves for vegetables, herbs, fish, and grain. Nothing happened quickly. No one hurried him. Bread deserved patience. Near the center of the village, several women gathered beneath another tree to grind grain together. Large grinding stones rested before them. The steady sound of stone moving across stone created a gentle rhythm that blended with birdsong and distant conversation. Forward. Back. Forward. Back. The movement never seemed rushed. One woman paused now and then to stretch her shoulders. Another brushed flour from her hands before smiling at her neighbor. Their work was tiring. Yet sharing it made the hours pass more gently. Children played nearby using little figures shaped from clay. One child had made a tiny fishing boat. Another had shaped a miniature oven. A little girl proudly showed her friend a small clay cat no larger than her thumb. The figures were simple. Their edges were uneven. Yet each reflected something familiar from village life. The barber watched them with quiet affection. Perhaps one day those same children would shape real boats, bake real bread, weave real baskets. Or perhaps one of them would someday sit beneath this very sycamore tree, carefully sharpening bronze blades before welcoming neighbors with calm hands and patient eyes. As the sun climbed toward the middle of the sky, the shadows beneath the tree grew smaller. The barber paused to drink cool water from a clay cup. He dipped a clean cloth into the water and gently wiped his hands. The coolness felt refreshing. Nearby, the fisherman returned briefly from the river to mend a damaged net before heading out again in the evening. One younger fisherman sat cross-legged upon the ground, carefully untangling a section where several ropes had twisted together. An older fisherman joined him without speaking. Together they worked patiently. No one blamed the tangled net. No one became frustrated. Some tasks simply required quiet attention. Watching them, the barber thought about his own work. Hair sometimes grew unevenly. A beard occasionally curled in unexpected ways. Scissors became dull. Razors needed sharpening. None of these things were problems. They were simply part of the work. Accepting them made the day feel lighter. The breeze shifted. It carried with it the cool scent of the Nile mixed with the fragrance of fresh bread, damp clay, cut wood, and herbs drying in the sunlight. The village breathed peacefully beneath the warm Egyptian sky. The barber reached once more for the carved wooden comb. Its polished surface had already become familiar in his hand. The next customer smiled as he approached the waiting stool. The quiet rhythm of another ordinary day continued, woven together by simple work, gentle conversation, and the steady flow of the eternal river that had carried the lives of humble Egyptians forward, one peaceful sunrise after another. The day slowly settles into evening once more. The last customer has long since returned home. The barber has folded his clean linen cloths and carefully wrapped his bronze razors inside their familiar basket. The fishermen have pulled their narrow boats safely onto the riverbank, their nets hanging quietly to dry in the gentle evening breeze. The baker has swept the last traces of flour from his doorway, and tomorrow's dough rests peacefully beneath its covering, waiting through the cool hours of the night. Across the village, the warmth of cooking fires slowly fades. Families gather for one final meal together. Bread is broken by hand. A few roasted fish are shared beside bowls of lentils and onions. Clay cups are filled with cool water drawn from the Nile earlier in the day. The conversations are soft, filled with ordinary thoughts about tomorrow's work, a child's growing height, a roof that will need repairing after the next flood season, or a neighbor who offered a kind helping hand. Nothing about this evening will be written onto the walls of a temple. No royal scribe will record the names of these humble people. Yet their quiet lives have shaped this land just as surely as the great monuments rising along the Nile. Every loaf of bread, every woven basket, every repaired fishing net, every sharpened razor, every carefully built boat, every field planted beside the river, Each ordinary task became part of something much larger than any one person could see. The fishermen sit beside the water for a little while before sleep. The river moves gently before them, reflecting the first stars that appear overhead. A cool breeze carries the scent of reeds and wet earth across the quiet shore. Somewhere in the distance, a night bird calls once before settling into silence. The oldest fisherman watches the current without speaking. He has seen the Nile during years of generous floods and years when the water rose more slowly. He has watched children grow into skilled rowers and careful fathers. He has repaired the same net so many times that each knot feels as familiar as his own hands. Beside him, a younger fisherman quietly folds tomorrow's nets. He works slowly, checking every cord in the fading light. Not because anyone is watching. Simply because careful work has become part of who he is. Under the great sycamore tree, the barber pauses before going home. The stool where so many neighbors have rested now stands empty beneath the whispering leaves. He runs one hand gently across its smooth wooden seat. Tomorrow another fisherman may sit there. Or perhaps a farmer. A potter dusted with clay. A merchant returning from a distant village. Or a young child receiving a first haircut beneath the comforting shade. The barber smiles softly. The tree will welcome them all, just as it always has. He lifts his basket. Inside, every tool has been cleaned. The carved wooden comb rests beside the older ones, already worn smooth by another day's quiet service. There is comfort in knowing that everything is ready for tomorrow, even if tomorrow remains unseen. The village itself begins to sleep. Oil lamps grow dim behind reed curtains. One by one, their warm glow disappears. Children curl close beside their parents on woven mats. Outside, donkeys stand quietly beneath the stars. Cats wander silently through empty paths before finding warm places to rest. The marketplace, so full of gentle voices during the day, now belongs only to moonlight and shadows. Far beyond the village, the desert lies still beneath the night sky. The endless sand reflects pale silver beneath the moon. Palm trees sway gently along the riverbanks. The papyrus reeds whisper together whenever the breeze passes among them. The Nile never stops its patient journey. While every home sleeps, the river continues flowing northward, carrying the rich waters that have nourished generations beyond counting. It carried the boats of these fishermen. It reflected the faces of these barbers. It watered the grain that became the baker's bread. It shaped the clay beneath the potter's hands. It offered quiet companionship to every ordinary soul who lived beside its banks. Centuries will pass. Kingdoms will rise and fade. Temples will weather beneath wind and sand. Names carved into stone will slowly soften with time. Yet the quiet rhythm of everyday life will remain the truest heartbeat of ancient Egypt. Long before the monuments became wonders of the world, someone was already kneading bread before sunrise. Someone was already casting a fishing net into the morning mist. Someone was already sweeping the floor of a humble mud brick home. Someone was already sharpening a bronze razor beneath the shade of a faithful tree. History often remembers rulers. But civilizations are carried gently forward by ordinary hands. By people who wake before dawn. Who work with patience. Who care for their families. Who repair what has been worn. Who share what little they have. Who greet their neighbors with quiet kindness. The people whose names have been forgotten were never truly lost. They remain in the worn paths beside the river. In the smooth handles of well-used tools. In the patient crafts passed from parent to child. In the simple rhythm of sunrise and sunset that changed so very little across the centuries. Now the stars shine brightly above the Nile once again. The air is cool. The river is calm. The fishing boats rest safely upon the shore. The sycamore tree stands silent over the empty marketplace. The clay ovens have grown warm no longer. Only a few glowing embers remain, slowly fading into ash. The breeze grows softer. The sounds become fewer. The village settles into deep and peaceful sleep. The river continues its quiet song through the darkness, just as it has for thousands of years. And somewhere beneath that vast Egyptian sky, where reeds gently sway and water softly touches the shore, the ancient world drifts into silence, slowly, peacefully, until there is only the calm whisper of the Nile beneath the stars, carrying the quiet lives of forgotten people gently through the endless night.